Hello, everyone. Our respected professors in the meeting, my dear colleagues, participants, and one and all gathered here. Team Geo Akarshan welcomes you all to this webinar session. Thanks for joining us today. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Divyanshu Gupta, and I am student of MSc Tech Geophysics from Banaras Hindu University. And today, I'll be hosting the second webinar session of the Geo Talks lecture series of event Geo Akarshan, organized by SCG and SPG Student Chapter BHU. Along with me, we have Ms. Sakshi Sonkar as the co-host of this webinar. Today, we have our very wonderful guest, Mr. Pawan Kumar Singh, sir. Before proceeding further, I would like to apprise about Sir to you all. Sir is working with Oil India Limited as a chief geophysicist and have a vast experience in the domains of seismic acquisition, imaging, and quantitative interpretation, and is also involved in airborne gravity gradiometry and passive seismic surveys. Sir has various academic associations, including guest lectures, supervising dissertations, and collaborative industry academia research studies. Sir holds a master degree in geophysics from Banaras Hindu University. It is a great honor for us to have Sir today to deliver a lecture on the topic Role of Geophysics in Hydrocarbon Exploration. I would like to inform all the participants that there will be a brief question and answer session at the end of the webinar, for which you have to type your questions into the chat box. We will also provide you all a feedback form so that we can improve our upcoming lectures. Please note that the form will contain 2 questions related to the talk. Participants who fill the form, only those will get certificate, so do fill it. Also, for your prior information, the whole session is being recorded so that we can upload it to our YouTube channel. So now, I think we are good to proceed, and thus I welcome Sir to deliver his talk. Sir, please.
Thank you, Divyanshi, for a very good introduction. And first of all, I will congratulate the students of BHU, geophysics students, that they are working so good. They are so dynamic, and this events, I hope that it will success and achieve your objective, said objective of the this particular event. So,
Thank you, sir.
yeah. So let me come to directly to the presentation. The topic is basically role of geophysics in hydrocarbon exploration. So let me share my screen. The screen is visible to all.
Yes, sir. We can see the screen.
Okay, so the basic objective of this presentation is particularly students who can understand, basically the first year or maybe second year or up to certain state final year students also, that what are the role of geophysics in hydrocarbon exploration and how various methods are being utilized in hydrocarbon industry. So coming to some basics, many of you might think that the formation of hydrocarbon is very similar to our kitchen to dining table concept. That means if you want to eat something, you have to purchase some raw materials, maybe vegetables or whatever you want to like, and you have to apply some heat or boil or roast it, and then somebody has to bring on dining table, or you can do your self-service, and then the food is ready to eat. So, in the similar fashion, in formation of generation of hydrocarbon, we can say source, generation, migration, and entrapment. So, source are basically the organic rich material. They are basically flora fauna. And when this source is undergone a range of temperature and pressure for certain time, maybe millions of years, then it creates hydrocarbon. And then hydrocarbon are lighter than water, so they have the tendency to move upward. So the movement of uh, hydrocarbon is known as migration. And during the migration pathway, whenever it gets any entrapment, means a porous rock overlaid by some trap rock, means impervious rock. So that process is called accumulation. So basically, these hydrocarbons are lie in the pores of the source means reservoir. And to produce hydrocarbon, it's very much necessary that these pores are interconnected and fluid is able to flow so that we can produce it. So coming to oil industry, basically in E&P cycle, we acquire rights. Means whenever you want to do exploration or production or development, you have to have rights to explore on that particular geographical area. So that is done by Government of India through bidding. Any company, maybe oil company, means national oil company, or NLCs can get. Then you have to explore the area. During the exploration phase, basically geophysics are mainly seismic are utilized to identify prospects and leads. And to ascertain oil and gas there, you have to drill wells. And then you have to appraise, if you discover any hydrocarbon, you have to appraise the field. Appraise the field means you have to estimate the hydrocarbon in place, type of hydrocarbon, and what are the economics of producing that particular pool. And after that, you develop the field. Develop the field means you drill more number of wells to produce that hydrocarbon, and you have to lay out a lot of surface infrastructure. For example, if it's a gas discovery, you have to lay out certain specific pipelines. If it's oil discovery, some different type of pipelines to the nearest refinery and so on. And after that, you produce. A life cycle of one field may be around this entire cycle may be up to from 30 years to maybe many hundreds of years. And then safely you have to abandon the field. Abandon the field means information from that seismic survey. Then my parameters may be very intense. So based on those things, we basically decide our parameters. And during planning, as I have said, you have to plan with the local authorities. If there are certain hindrances in your area, like some swamps, some rivers, some township. So accordingly, you have to plan for the change in receivers and source positions so that it can minimally affect your survey objective. In geodetic survey, basically, you use the GPS. GPS are maybe differential GPS and total stations. Total station, many of you might be knowing that the same equipment we use in civil surveys. So by that, we try to pinpoint each and every source and receiver location on the ground and mark it. A typical ground electronics look like this. There are certain boxes, there are certain cables, there are certain this cables, optical fiber cables, and there are geophones. So they in a field they are layout like this. Say this is the seismic equipment. From line they are connected with the boxes. From boxes various cables are connected, and from each connected cable there may be 4 or 6 geophone connected, and they are implanted on the ground. So mostly in a typical 3D seismic survey, maybe hundreds at least people may be involved in layout the cables. And these entire things are mostly, in most other cases, they are connected with equipment. Means if anything not joined here in the instrument, you can know. If any geophone is not planted properly from equipment, you can know. So during seismic data recording in the equipment, the recording truck, basically we see like this. So each and every channel is shown here. They are digitally connected with the cable, and with radio and walkie-talkie. There are a lot of persons which are connected with the person sitting here, and any time if any discontinuity here any geophone is open, any animal is there, so you try to with the walkie-talkie you try to communicate and get the problem fixed. Then once you lay out the cable in any day, then simultaneously there are clean up of short codes. Because if you are doing the explosive survey, uh, explosive need to be blasted below weathering layer. So typically it's around 60 feet or 70 feet or so. So there are various persons, the group of persons, they try to drill, and then this is a typical image of explosive. It's a cylindrical shape. Uh, you load these explosive along with detonator in these holes, and finally you blast the explosive, and all the receivers record that data. So for blasting also means I need to be ready. Then from the equipment I give command to the particular person called blaster. Through radio signal, they decode means the person sitting there, their instruction, and then explosive blast. And it's a typical photo of this blasting a short hole, and then you record the data at your geophone. Simultaneously, that data, when geophones are recording, say the record length is, for example, 6 to 8 seconds. Simultaneously, this entire data set will be displayed at your, not only displayed, but also stored in a high-end storage devices. So, and then from these devices, you try to write these things in a tape. Nowadays, advanced tapes are there, ATO tapes 5, 6 means one tape maybe around 5 to 6 terabyte. So 5 to 6 terabyte, maybe one 3D block can be stored in one single tape. So another thing, as I have said, that most of the times all the geophones are connected with the equipment through certain cable. But in last say 10 years, mostly people are moving towards the cable-less seismic as well. So cable-less seismic basically they are nodes. They, you are able to see the mouse. Uh, they are not connected physically. They are connected with radio, right? And in the equipment also there is a radio signal, and there are various radio infrastructure. So through radio, all the equipments are connected. So advantage is that in most of the EGL area for seismic survey is mostly has been done. So in the frontier area, to lay out a cable in a hill or in a forest or maybe in a riverine area is quite difficult. So mostly nowadays, data is required with cable seismic also. And these data set, these nodes basically store data in their memory. They do not throw, in most of the cases, they do not throw the data with the equipment. So you can harvest the data with certain Wi-Fi and those things in the equipment in there. One thing very important that in the cable system, mostly your data is, we know that in processing we used to read that demultiplication is not required because all the data is demultiplication now. But here, if you can see in the node system, all the data is actually recorded in a multiplex form because they are trace sequential. They are not time sequential. Each node stores the data in the memory of its own. So there is a small video you can see about the operations. I hope it's visible.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. Are you able to listen some sound also, some music?
No, sir.
Okay. Then you can see. this is a typical seismic camp having some cables and geophones. Mostly we do the survey with the string of geophones, 12 or maybe 6, mostly 12. So they are one string of the geophones. Since land seismic survey is mostly used in this region, particularly northeast India with explosive, or most of the places, so safety is of the prominent concern. So that was just for a this is a blasting explosive. This is a blaster, and then you explode the pins. It's look like this, and at the same time you get data on your screen. So, coming to, I will touch a brief, in very brief to processing interpretation, all the things. So, in seismic data, basically in a three-dimensional, if I talk about three-dimensional seismic data, so there are three axes, X, Y, Z. So, data is basically can be seen in X direction, what we say, maybe in line, in Y direction, cross line, and in Z line, Z is basically time because you observe data in time. So if there are 10 kilometers, so in X direction there are 401 samples. If 25 meter is my line interval, so in line interval, there may be 4,000 samples here. And in Z axis, it's 6,000 millisecond data. Then there may be 3,000 samples. So if you calculate, there are 48 million watershed in this particular 100 square kilometer data, and I think 1.6 million traces. So, what exactly a trace means? A trace is basically a symbol of a number of sinusoidals. So, these sinusoidals are having different amplitude, phase, and frequency. And once you do the and they are basically added, means one seismic trace can be seen as a symbol of various sinusoidals having different frequency amplitude which are interacted at different phase. And once you do certain mathematical operations as Fourier transform and Gaussian, you can get the amplitude and phase spectra of these sinusoids. So if you see recorded seismic data, we have the amplitude, frequency, phase, and two-way time. Two-way time basically based on the velocity. So in a typical recorded seismic data, there are many things. Means there may be free surface growth, means near surface reflections. There may be surface waves, ground waves, or Rayleigh waves. Basically, most of the ground waves are Rayleigh waves. Ambient noise, some towns, some movements of vehicles or anything. The ambient noise will be there. Direct arrivals will be there, and apart from reflection, there will be reflected waves as well. And if there are some edges in the subsurface, there may be scattered wave as well. And apart from that, there are many other physical phenomena and some electronics effect will be also there at the recorded data. So the entire objective of processing is to eliminate the noises from the recorded data. Means we want to see the variations in amplitude, frequency, phase, and time. Only due to this geological things, nothing else. So that is the whole objective of seismic data processing. So as I have said, if you have recorded data, the final objective. Okay. So then there may be a number of layers. You want to unravel these layers of the processing and interpret these things in terms of geology. What may be the age of those formations, what may be the depositional environment, what may be the structure there. So some of the steps like noise elimination. So we know that there are two sort of noise in seismic data. One is random and second is coherent. Coherent means having some phase relationship, like multiples, direct waves, or ground roll. They are coherent noise. And random noise, it may be anything which are random in phase, like any vehicle movement, high frequency noise, scatters, and those other things. The basic objective is to remove these noise. Means if let's say a typical short gather without any noise suppression. If you see here, this data is after noise suppression. So they are basically ground rolls or surface waves or relay waves basically. And there may be some random noise as well. So you try to eliminate these things to get the noiseless. We cannot say noise free because it's always there. There will be certain noise. So you can say high signal to noise ratio data after this particular step. Then we have to apply amplitude correction. We know that the energy, whenever the energy propagates, there will be a spectral divergence. And apart from spectral divergence, which is inverse Spire law, there will be absorption, exponential decay in amplitudes. So, as the wave propagates, due to these two effects, we get the less amplitude for deeper and towards the far data. So, basic objective is to estimate the decay curve and accordingly apply the recovery function, so that this can be the lost amplitude due to the spectral divergence and absorption can be re-achieved. Because our objective is to see any change in amplitude due to geological reasons, not any other reasons. So again, this process may be deterministic as well as statistical. So the example I have shown that you try to define a recovery function based on your decay curve. So it's a purely deterministic statistical method. But most of the times that was just for illustration. But mostly we do the deterministic thing, like we try to analyze the velocity so that we can know the ray path, and accordingly the spectral divergence can be estimated. Then frequency enhancement. Actually, we know that ours is a low pass filter. Means actually what happened due to inelastic collision, or what we can say, absorption due to fluid presence. Always high frequency attenuate rapidly than the lower frequency wave. So we try to design a wavelet so that we can enhance the higher frequency and in turn enhance resolution. So again, let's say for illustrative purpose, a typical frequency band of a seismic data looks like this. After certain frequency, what we say dominant frequency, there will be loss in a higher frequency content. So we try to derive the inverse filter, and our objective is to get the flat spectrum at the higher frequency as well. This is just for illustration. It never looks like this, but it's a lot. It looks like this actually. So the process is known as deconvolution. So this particular short gather or CMP gather maybe is without any deconvolution. So the frequency bandwidth, you can see it's a decay from here to here. Your entire objective of deconvolution to get the frequencies here. So this is a flat spectrum up to maybe 60 hertz. And consequently, you can see that here the resolution, temporal resolution enhances a lot compared to this. And again, one thing is called static correction. So static correction, basically we try to remove the effect of the undulations on the surface as well as the effect of within layer. Because say if there is a hill in your survey area, so obviously if you put source receiver there, the travel time there will be more. So it will look like a flat layer in the subsurface, will look like a valley in the subsurface in seismic data, in time data, because that is the effect of your hill. So you try to put your entire data on one datum, and why Verizon layer also need to be taken account, because the velocity of Verizon layer is very low. If there are undulations in the Verizon layer, so since the velocity are very low, they will contribute a lot of time. So we try to remove these two effects. So you can see that prior to static correction, these are the this is one seismic system. We can see here undulations in the reflector, but these undulations are not due to the subsurface things. These undulations are due to the surface and near surface things. Basically, the elevation differences and the resin layer behavior. So here we can see it's a quite flat reflector. So this is the basic objective of this datum correction or static correction. Then entire seismic data, as I have told, is measured in time. So we have to know the velocity. Then you can understand about the depth. So basic philosophy to determine velocity is that you require multi-fold data. Means the same CMP point is mapped by various times having different offsets. So with the relationship of offset versus time, we try to reconstruct the velocity. So say if that particular trace is at 50-meter interval or offset, that is from 2-kilometer offset and that is from 4-kilometer offset. So based on the relationship that from 50-meter to 2-kilometer offset and to 4-kilometer offset, what are the time differences? That is basically hyperbolic in nature. The question people might be knowing better. So that is a hyperbolic question. So we try to plot, and the velocity at which it gets plotted, we assume that it's a velocity there at particular CMP point or at particular subsurface location. So after velocity determination, we stat the data set to know the means. Statin means if mostly we are trying the multi-fold data for each CMP. Say 60-fold data is there, we have 60 traces having different offsets. You try to correct NMO and then stat to enhance signal to noise ratio, and particularly for random noise. So these are the stat sections which tells about the geology. Then spatial repositioning, basically what we say migration. So zero offset example by illustration I'm showing. If your source receivers are here, so midpoint will be here and so on. But in case of dipping layers, if source receivers are there, your reflection point will be here. Though you are assuming that the data is coming from here. You are assuming if source receiver is here, you are assuming that data is coming from here. If source receiver is here, you are assuming that since time is less, so you are assuming it's coming from here and this is a time, and then here is a time. So the basic objective of migration is to put this point to this point, actual repression point, this point to this point, this actual repression point, and so on. So as in this illustration also you can see, after migration your dips are steeper, time or depth domain, whatever the migration you are doing, and the reflectors are shorter. It's very much evident from this bottom also. So that is one example of unmigrated and migrated system. Here you can see the tip of the layers are changing. You see this particular structure here. Here dip is more. Or even here, if you can see, I hope the pointer is visible to you.
Yes, sir. The
Okay.
pointer is visible.
Okay. If you see here, here also you can see the dip are more in the migrated cells. So migrated cells here also in the top also you can see the dips are more compared to here. So after migration is mostly at the its last process of processing. After that you do interpretation. So interpretation is a very much a multidisciplinary study by geophysicists, geologists, engineers, economists, and many more. So from seismic data, you try to pick these layers. That what are the formations and what may be the two-way time of this particular stratigraphic sequences, and then you try to map the faults. You take the help of well and all of the other geoscientific data you are having, and then you try to visualize the structure there. But structure there actually says about the entrapment, that there is a possibility of entrapment. Maybe stratigraphic structure, or maybe stratigraphic traps, or maybe structural traps. They tell about that the particular location, they have the capability to hold hydrocarbon. But during interpretation, you require to do a lot of things to establish generation and migration. What we say, basin modeling. Because anticline I can see from seismic, but whether that anticline holds hydrocarbon or not, I have to establish the fact that nearby there should be source, and then from source that particular structure or stratigraphic trap should come into the migration pathway. So those all things are done with a lot of attribute analysis and inversion and many other things are there. And obviously, sometimes we say that oil and gas founds in the mind of geoscientists. So that's true. That in the purely exploratory area, you have to impart your thought process that there may be the source migration. But yes, if a basin matures slowly you understand anything, and then most other things are data driven. But in the rank exploration areas, it's true that oil lies in the mind of geoscientists. So, during interpretation, to understand these all things, we do attribute analysis. So, in most of the attribute analysis, I have told about this in line and cross lines, but you can slice the data in time as well. And slice the data means the basic constituent of the seismic data are amplitude, phase, and frequency, right? But there may be hundreds of their derivative, their mathematical variants, their cosines, and many things. So based on those things, more than 150 attributes are there. They are basically derived from amplitude, phase, and frequency. And you analyze those data set, you try to calibrate those information with the available well data if you are having, and try to interpret in terms of mostly these things are required for stratigraphic traps. Like here you can see a beautiful video channel is visible here. Again, whether this video channel contains hydrocarbon, that need to be calibrated with available well data. If you don't have the available well data, you have to apply your mind and some geological model you have to think of. And only after drilling of your wells, you can know that really there is hydrocarbon is present or not. So, coming to Jivach office, in which basically we do quantitative interpretation. Mostly we do seismic inversion or AVO sort of stuffs. So we know that seismic data is basically interface property. So from this interface property, we have to derive the layer property. So that is called seismic inversion. In layer property, basically we are interested in impedances. And again, from impedances, we have to reconstruct the geology, that what are the geological layers present there. But there is one issue that seismic data not explicitly depends on impedance. that actually depends on contrast. Contrast means reflection coefficient. So we need certain a priori information from inversion. If we are interested to determine the what we can say absolute value of impedance, you need to have some a priori information. So probably many of you have seen this slide or not, I don't know. But can anybody say that what it is? Anybody can say what you gather from this picture? So yeah.
So we have got some replies. They are saying crater.
Okay.
From the participants, we have got the replies.
Okay. Okay. So wait for a minute. Wait for a minute. Picture. Yeah. So the whole idea is, if I want to say about this picture, first I must have the scale on both the side. Moreover, the color scale as well. Because if it's a microscopic image, then it may be some grain or one drop. But if the S and Y axis are of the order of kilometers, then I can interpret in terms of meteorites. So that is one part. Secondly, if I know the shape and this scale of this particular photograph, then I can interpret like this: that one man in the rainy day might have created this. But what exactly mean by a priori information? If I know that this particular picture is from a jungle where there are many of elephants live, then my interpretation will be like this. So that is the role of a priori information in inversion. Without a priori information, you cannot know absolute impedance. You can get relative impedance. So that the same thing in some can be understood by bandwidth. So seismic data is band limited data. We know that in most of the times seismic data can have the frequency up to 5 hertz or nowadays 2 hertz on the lower side. On the higher side, maybe up to 50 to 60 hertz based on the depth of interest. So as I have said, this seismic is based on contrast, not absolute impedance. So any process you apply on this data set, that will give relative impedance. But prior model, what we mostly say low frequency model, we act from prior understanding. Prior understanding in our case may be the well data, the seismic horizons, means the regional geology of the area, or local geology of the area, and we add this information to get absolute impedance. So mostly these are done by model-based inversion, or sometimes constant space spike inversion. But in relative impedance means if you are doing for say the original colored inversion, you cannot, without using well, then you cannot get this absolute impedance. Or if you are doing this original space spike inversion, original means there are now many modifications of those things. For example, space spike inversion, what we read, that provides the relative impedance. But nowadays people do constant space spike inversion, CSSI. So that gives you the absolute impedance. But the idea is that somehow that particular algorithm uses well data. So these entire things actually based on the convolution model. So mostly they are deterministic in nature, deterministic inversion what we see. But many times we say that seismic inversion is non-unique. So where are the non-uniqueness? So basically the non-uniqueness is beyond seismic bandwidth. So what we try to do from, suppose I am working in a development area where in 100 square kilometer I have 20 wells there. So I have very concrete information about the various thin layers. So from that, I try to add high frequency in my inversion engine. and try to get through variograms and try to get very high resolution image of the subsurface. Image means here impedance. So that particular process is known as geostatistical inversion. And mostly here, what we have done, we have taken the higher frequencies from the well data, and the uncertainty we try to interpret in terms of probabilities, basically. So basic use of this ABO inversion steps in ENP workflow is to minimize the explosion risk, because on just on the basis of ABO inversion you can never drill a well, because some basic premises need to be fulfilled. Like entrapment should be there, some closure should be there, some entrapment mechanism must be there. Now, to know that whether that entrapment holds hydrocarbon or not, or to derive the properties or layer properties, you do inversion. So it minimizes your risk basically. So in entire workflow, we use a lot of data set apart from apart from seismic well data, this interpretation data, lot data, sometimes fluorescent data as well, and we try to predict the fluid, that what are the fluid are in terms of physics also. There are many sort of studies in reservoir geophysics, like post-stat inversion, in which we try to invert the stat data and the output is limited to acoustic impedance. Now, acoustic impedance may be good, but that is for shallower and maybe gas bearing prospects. Because the end objective is not to derive the acoustic impedance, the end objective is to find oil and gas. So, unless this hydrocarbon bearing sands and water bearing sands, they are not separable on the basis of acoustic impedance, it may not be of the greater use. Similarly, in the pre-stat inversion, we are interested. Finally we get acoustic impedance and Poisson's ratio as well, due to the ABO properties. Now, the information about Poisson's ratio along with acoustic impedance mostly separates your reservoir zone from the background. So most of the times people do pre-stat inversion. And there are many more, like reservoir property, population, and probabilistic phases attribute. So these are basically high-end development tools. It requires a lot of wells. For example, this reservoir property estimation. In this particular thing, at the well, I know that what is my impedance, because I have the sonic log and density log. And at the well, I know that particular layer is containing water or hydrocarbon. So if there are plenty of wells in one area, I can create a statistical model that this much of impedance and this much VP by VS gives me this much of hydrocarbon saturation. And then I apply this information to the inversion output and get the reservoir property in whole volume. So, but these are the things require a lot of well data, and they are development tool. And final end result will be like this. For example, this is a hydrocarbon saturation volume. These are the drilled wells. So we know that these are the hydrocarbon patches. They are producing wells. So from this particular study, we can say that there is a very good pool there, and we can have the next well here, or maybe here. In entire geophysics workflow, database management is one very important aspect, because we generally say human resource is the most important resource of any organization. But in ENP means exploration and production sector. Apart from human resource, your ENP data is one of the very prominent resources. So all the data, very routinely we try to archive in a new data tapes. It means suppose you people might not have been seeing this floppy drives. So if I have any data in floppy, today I cannot read, because there are two issues. Floppy has a shelf life, 2 years, 4 years. After 30 years, that floppy may be gone back. And if floppy is good, today how can I, I don't have the read-write device for floppy. So similarly for the tapes, what happens? Every tape has a shelf life, and uh, after some time, it's very difficult to find read and write devices for those particular tapes. So it's a very routine practice to archive your old data in multiple copies in the latest media. Not only that, you create multiple copy, and today this data science is a big science. So we create multiple data centers. Means entire data set is put at least two or three geographical locations, so that in case of any disaster, you have a data set at the place, and they are synchronously connected. And GIS-based data management is nowadays means most of the ENP company having GIS-based data set. Means your entire data set, not only geoscientific but entire ENP data. When I say ENP data means apart from geophysical data, there may be well-oriented data, production data, and the drilling data. Many data are there, and reports are there. So geographically, you try to put all data with certain geographical reference, and so that at any moment of time, at any geographical location, if I click a mouse, I can know that these are the data set available here, all sort of data. So it helps you take decision faster and in an efficient way. There are certain advanced seismic methods. So time-lapse seismic you might have heard. So 3D seismic we know. 4D seismic basically we try to repeat your 3D seismic. The basic objective, as I have said, in 2D, you want to know the cross section of a subsurface. In 3D, you want to know about the volume of rock, or volume of the rock will be the proper word. And but in time-lapse seismic, you are interested in knowing the condition of reservoir. So what happens? There is a reservoir here, and that is the overlying this layer, maybe say. So rock property will be rock property here means basically in terms of seismic electric properties in density. So here say rock properties are A, here B. So you have acquired some seismic data today, and this is the seismic data here. After say 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 2 years even, based on the production of that particular reservoir and type of the reservoir, you are doing a lot of things. You are producing hydrocarbon. Sometimes you may inject fluids like CO2 or this water injection to enhance your production. So I mean to say any fluid inflow or outflow will change PVT condition. What we say PVT condition of the reservoir means saturation, pressure, and minorly temperature also. So after this entire production, the rock property here remains same, and here rock properties will be changing. Reservoir. Again, if I observe one seismic data, say today, or maybe after 5 years, then I have a seismic there. Now, the basic assumption is that within 30, 40, or 50 years, there is no any tectonic movement like this that can change the reservoir property. So the changes, the difference between these two data sets will lead to, is assumed to be due to the fluid movements, and that particular difference data in terms of time, in terms of amplitude, phase frequency can be interpreted in terms of fluid front movements in the reservoir, and effectively you can plan your EOR means induced oil recovery things. And so for example, one credit seismic you have observed in 86, then again in 95, and again in 2008. So based on the difference, you know, the above picture is the difference between 95 and 86. So you can see here that the fluid column was somehow like this. And after, if you difference from 2008 to 95, this oil water contact is shifted to here. Means we are producing from this pool. Now, after say 10 years or 15 years of production, your new oil water contact is here, and now any UR IUR should be limited to this particular. this particular cases. So Forte is basically a Java management tool. So another thing, we know multi-component SASMIT. So during field operations, actually we try to record 9 components. 9 components ideally we say, but what happens? You have the 3 component receivers, which can record compressional wave as well as 2 components, 2 orthogonal components of shear wave. So, if you are exploring any source, basically compressional source, it means you are exploring P wave. Now, whenever a P wave or compressional wave reflects from a reflector, it splits in shear and compressional as well. So here we are intended to record P as well as shear. So such type of observation are called converted wave SASMIT. Basically, we are interested in orthogonal means compressional component and 2 orthogonal components of shear waves. Now there are 9 component survey also people say, in which here the source was P wave or compressional wave. But if we generate the source as shear also, basically 2 orthogonal components of shear also, then we can observe 9 component data set. So what are the basic, why we require this? We know that compressional wave passes through matrix as well as fluid, while the shear wave passes only through matrix. So if you have the information about compressional and shear waves both, then it can directly tell about the presence of fluid there. So that is the whole objective. What we say, it's a fluid and lithologic discriminator. Multi-component SASMIT surveys are mostly they are used for this fluid and lithologic discriminators, as well as fault density and orientation. This for determination of density and orientation of faults. Why? Because so there are 2 or 3 main applications of multi-component. One, imaging is always better in PS, it's multi-component survey. What happens if there is a very high velocity layer near surface? So P wave, the deflection angle of compressional wave will be very high. So that is not mostly recorded. So if we are observing the multi-component data, means we are recording the compressional and shear both, then the imaging will be better below the high velocity layers. Similarly, if there is a gas chimney, shallow surface gas chimneys are there. So compressional wave scatters. So the imaging below gas chimneys in compressional waves are very poor. But if you have the PS data, means converted wave SASMIT data, or maybe pure shear component data, then obviously the imaging is much better. And in terms of fracture detection, what I was telling that whenever shear wave propagates, and if there is an anisotropy, so shear wave splits into 2 parts. What we say fast shear and slow shear. So based on the differences of fast shear and slow shear, again their amplitude and time both, we can interpret the fracture orientation in that particular region. So for these purposes, multi-component SASMIT is utilizing oil and gas. And nowadays, see the SASMIT survey, the shape of SASMIT survey has changed tremendous in the last 20-30 years. So why it happened? If you are working in a basin, see if you are seeing Earth from Moon, so you can see Everest from Moon. But if you have to see the smaller undulations on the Earth, you have to come down from the Moon. Maybe from helicopter 100 or 200 meter above surface, you can see those particular variations. So idea is very simple. If you are working in a basin, all the big reservoirs are already delineated. Now you have to identify the subtle traps, small traps. So you need a better seismic image, high resolution seismic image. So the recent advancement in recording instruments, in the sense that in 90, hardly you can do seismic survey with 1000 channel. not more than that, in 90s. But nowadays, even you can acquire the seismic data with 1 million receivers. And secondly, sensor technology. Lower frequency are very important, as I have told. In inversion, lower frequency are required essentially. So either you are taking from the low frequency model, but if you on the surface, if you record the lower and lower frequency, that will be much beneficial in seismic inversion. So earlier people were using the 10 hertz natural frequency geophones, but nowadays geophones are available. Basically, digital sensors are available, uh, which natural frequency is around 2 to 2.5 hertz. And this entire data set, this entire development allows you to acquire the very long offset data, wide area data, broadband means in terms of frequency, and this huge data set. The advancement in computation efficiency allows it to process with the very advanced algorithms so that we can get very high resolution image, and in turn we can get the subtle traps. Few examples are there. They are conventional SAS mode. So here, if you cannot distinctly delineate this faults. But here you can see these faults are very distinctly visible. It's a high density data. Means a very the data recorded with very high channel count. Maybe here receiver interval may be 30 meter, but here receiver interval may be of the order of 6 to 7 meter or maybe 10 meter. One more thing, if you are acquiring the data with very high channel count, then your fold will be very high, of the order of say 200 if you are acquiring the data. Then you can see the data, and if it's a wide azimuth data, you are acquiring data from all the azimuths. Then you can see your data from various azimuths. So here, the purpose of showing this image to you is that from this direction, if your source and receiver is here you cannot see any fault. But if your source and receivers are here, you can see fault. So for this, similarly in the time slice area attributes also, you can see these discontinuity are not visible from this direction, but this discontinuity are very much visible from this direction. So the subtle entrapments, if you want to delineate, you always have to acquire the seismic data with very high channel count, with very broadband sensors. So people are nowadays requiring the data with large channel count and this broadband data. In the introduction, you have told that some HEG and PhD sort of things. So I thought of sharing a couple of slides. Airborne gravity radiometry, actually gravity field you know, but in airborne gravity radiometry, we actually measure the second order spatial derivative of gravity field. T, H, X, Y, YZ, and so on. So there are 9 components of gravity field because they are the second order spatial derivative of gravity field. But due to symmetry and Laplacian equation, there are 5 independent component of this particular tensor gravity field. So the conventional gravity, what happens? You have the certain limitations. But in HEG data, you can see the very minor faults, minor faults up to the depth of 4 kilometers very accurately. So nowadays people are in India in last 5 years, a lot of HEG work has been done by many of the ENP companies. The 3 major ENP company all has done. So the basic objective here is nowadays government is forcing for rapid exploration of the areas. There are national seismic program now. Some mission is coming. In OLP, a lot of area is being given to the national oil company as well as private players. So, first means now the tendency is like this. First, to acquire the HEG data over your plot and try to understand that where exactly I have to do my assessment. So, with this objective, HEG is very much utilized. So actually, this is a very not new technology; it's old technology. So in the aircraft there is a FTC instrument. There are three GGIs, what we say, and at each GGI there are two pair of this accelerometer. Means in totality there are 12 number of gravimeters within that particular equipment. They are arranged in a certain combination and angles so that they can derive the second order special derivative of electric field. This particular technology was used earlier in maybe in Second World War to this is by US to detect the submarines, because submarines they are metallic things, so in water the density will be obviously more. In passive seismic tomography is again again it's not new technology. The original this seismology, the Earth as a whole in seismology, in day out we are utilizing the tomography. But local scale implementation in oil and gas industries are nowadays quite common, particularly in the thrust belt areas where we don't know about very accurately about the velocities, and we could not get the seismic image proper. But what happens? They are the naturally occurring. They record the naturally occurring these earthquakes, and these are recorded at the surface. And based on their travel path and travel time at the networks, means in one survey you deploy maybe 500 sensors, and in you record for say 1 year. In 1 year, maybe there are say 200 this tremors and those all. So after recording those entire data, you create a lot of gray density in the source surface. So by analyzing or inverting the travel times at each of the station for each of the event, you try to reconstruct the subsurface model in terms of velocity and Poisson ratio. Though the model will be not as high resolution as seismic data, but it can guide you. The velocity can guide you to do pre-stat depth migration of the seismic data in the thrust belt area, and a lot of good images after applying PhD are observed in thrust belt data. So I will conclude my presentation. I don't think that I am late. It's late though, but our whole objective is to geophase is to find oil and gas, and seismic surveys are most potent technique for hydrocarbons. So that's all. There are a few slides, one or two. So many times, many people call me and ask about what are the companies in those are these carriers and many things. So in my opinion, geophases there are basically oil and gas industry is there, in which E&P companies are there, basically PSUs, and there are big MNCs also, E&P. Though oil and gas industry at this moment of time is not as lucrative as it was maybe 10 years back. And there are a lot of oil and gas service providers like CG, Schlumberger, Halliburton, many companies here. And apart from oil and gas industry, people should look for this groundwater and mineral exploration like GSI, state mineral organizations are there. Groundwater board means state and central groundwater board is there. And apart from that, there are rapid advancement in the utilization of geophase, particularly what we say civil geophase or engineering geophase for site selections, for this dam safety, or maybe for airport construction or any heavy construction. And, there are many environmental and space agencies who are geophase system. That's all.
Thank you, sir, for such an informative and engrossing lecture. We are very grateful to you for this lecture.
Anything you want to ask anybody?
Yes, sir. I would request the participants to put forward their queries, or if you want, you can mention them in the chat box too. So we have already got some questions in the chat box. The first question is from Sakshi Sonkar. The question is how to deal with hard rock like basalt using seismic survey for petroleum exploration.
Yeah, so there are two things. That is one of the major concerns. Very good question. First of all, I must say, basalt are very high velocity layers. So there are two problems. One is the amount of energy which goes below basalt, and second, very high degree of reflection. So mostly in basalt, what we do very long offset seismic surveys. Long offset means if your depth of investigation is say 3 kilometers, if you go for say 4 to 5 kilometers of this offsets, then basalt imaging can be done.
Okay, sir. I hope her query is solved. The next question is from Lakshmaya B. The question is, what is the natural frequency of geophone used for oil and gas exploration?
So first, let me tell you what is the natural frequency of geophone. If any sensors use got some digital data, so there will be always band limitations. So based on there will be the band limited data, then there will be the slope. So based on certain dB per output, we decide that after that, if we take the flat spectrum from the lowest frequency, what we say that is the natural frequency for that particular sensor. It means below natural frequency, the data cannot be recorded with reliability because the slope band itself is changing your amplitude. Now, for example, 10 or 15 years back, most of the seismic survey was done with the 10 hertz of geophones. But nowadays, plenty of surveys, say 50-60% or maybe 80% surveys, are being done with the 5 hertz geophone. And after that, few seismic survey are being done with 2.5 hertz.
Okay, sir. So the next question is from Mr. Aditya Srivastav. The question is, any special instruments are required to measure the gravity gradient?
Yes, yes. They are called the slide I have shown, I believe. Actually, for example, I will say this. Wait for a minute. So this is the equipment which measures this gravity gradient. So there is a FTG, POTS. In that there are two gravity gradient instruments, what we say GGI, and they are at 120 degree from each other, and they always rotate like this while observing the data. Within that particular one GGI, there are two pairs of discs within this, and they are always rotating like this. So this particular instrumentation is recorded for any this full tensor gravity recording. Now let me say you one point. This illustration, whatever I am showing, that may not be legal to show you because these particular things are shared by one of the service provider, and this equipment is today. Lockheed Martin is the proprietor of this particular equipment, not only equipment, but the prototype and those. No one can build these equipments. Only Lockheed Martin globally can build these equipments. So they are the equipments that we use.
So we have got one more question from Pradyumna Dastidar. The question is, what are the limitations of a 3-component geophones during acquisition?
During acquisition, as such, there is no limitation. But see, any multi-component data, means 3-component you are recording, it must be acquired with very high channel count. That is one part, because at the end of the day, you will be interested means to know the very detailed subsurface things. Certain limitation you can say, since we are observing the data vertical in two orthogonal component of shear waves. So during field operations, what happens? Each of the three component sensors need to be oriented in a certain direction with the help of compass, because you have to understand that what are the two orthogonal directions, two horizontal orthogonal directions, in which direction actually I am measuring. So if you are asking about your operations, so that is one challenge, that these all receivers with compass, one body or many body are there to try to adjust in a particular direction.
Okay, sir. The next question is from Mr. Sarthak Papne. The question is, what is the basic difference between temporal and spatial deconvolution, and what is the use of each?
Spatial deconvolution, I never listened the word, so I cannot answer. Spatial deconvolution, can anybody add? If anybody know. Spatial deconvolution is there any word? I don't think so. Or if there is a word spatial deconvolution, there may be certain context of it. So
Okay, sir. I would request the participants to put forward their queries if they are having. Okay. I would remind all the participants to fill the feedback form. It has been provided in the chat box. Please fill it.
so anyway,
Thank you so much.
to all of you, I hope that it was useful to you, and the basic the things were basic, but most of the times we do not connect that how this data set will be utilized in hydrocarbon industry. So I hope that the talk was useful. And anyway, once again, I congratulate to you all for such a dynamic and useful studentship there in PhD. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir. Thank you, sir. And sir, we are really grateful to you that you have agreed to be a part of our event and grace us with such an informative and interactive session. So we are really very thankful to you.
Okay,
And I
thanks.
would also.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you all.
thank you.